So when I talk to coding bootcamp students or people who are trying to break into the industry, one of the most common questions I get is, what is the ideal first job? And I thought that that is something that we could take a look at today. Now, these thoughts are based on my own experiences, and I'll give you the caveat that I've been really fortunate to, for the most part, have really great jobs where I've learned a lot that have been kind of more on the ideal side. But I'm going to give you an example today of basically the worst case scenario I can think of, and from there extract certain principles that I think make up a good job and the best possible first job to have as a junior developer or entry-level person who is just getting into the industry. So first of all, we'll start with my example. So the worst possible scenario that I could think of would be working by yourself or maybe with one other person, working with legacy technology and having no clear path forward to better yourself and kind of move up in the organization. So a common scenario for something like this might be you're working for maybe a nonprofit or a government entity, which was my first job, and you basically just have to like maintain a website or something like that. That is super non-ideal. You want something that is kind of more dynamic and where there's a lot of growth potential. So with that said, I'm going to talk about 3 areas that I think are the opposite of what I just described and why you would want to pursue them as a junior developer. Okay, so this kind of assumes like cultural fit and that the ideal place is a place that you would want to work. So I'm just going to take that for granted and assume that you're like interested in the product and you like the company and all that kind of thing. With all that stuff aside, the things that you really want to prioritize, in my opinion, and really want to select for are learning, mentorship, and transferable skills. So we're going to start with learning. So learning, why is learning so important at the beginning? It's because there is still a lot that you haven't figured out. I have a good friend who says, you don't know jack squat until you realize that you don't know jack squat. And if you're in the ideal position for a junior developer, you're going to realize really quickly that there's a whole lot of things that you haven't encountered yet. That's a really good thing, but it kind of goes counter to the temptation, which is to take your foot off the gas. I know I felt when I got my first developer job, I've done all this work, I went through a boot camp, I did all this stuff, I've done all this learning, and now I'm getting my reward. And I kind of took my foot off the gas, and I think that's fairly common. That's something you don't want to do. You want to continue to learn because those first 2 years or so are where you're going to have the opportunity to kind of gain the most value, as it were, not only in the market, but as an employee, because there's still going to be so many things left that you haven't learned yet. So I'd say continue to build projects, continue to take courses, continue to take on extra work, continue to try and experience different parts of the stack that maybe you haven't seen before. Those are all really good things. And you want to be in an environment where you're going to be able to do those kind of things, which kind of goes counter to what I was saying before about maybe just having like one thing that you do and kind of learning that thing, maintaining an old website or something like that is not going to give you enough learning opportunity. And this to me is the most important thing you really want to select for learning. This could be at a SaaS company or something where the product is a little bit more dynamic and forcing you to deal with lots of different things, database layer, API, maybe front end, complicated user interactions, all kinds of requests, things like that. You want something that is changing, where you're dealing with feature sets and hopefully actively developing those and trying to just make a great product no matter where you are, no matter what kind of company you're with. That goes for agencies as well. Okay, so we talked about learning. Now we're going to talk about the second thing, which is mentorship. Mentorship and learning are related and kind of go hand in hand, but learning potentially could be a little bit more on your own, whereas mentorship is inherently with another person, ideally a person that you're learning from. You can learn from other people and especially other software engineers in a lot of different ways. It could be anything from the very tactical, hey, can you unblock me and help me fix this bug, all the way up to just kind of observing people and figuring out, what does professionalism look like? What do the people who really excel in this company do? How do they approach their careers? How do they set goals? How do they track habits? How do they take notes in meetings and organize themselves? Really anything. It could be anything. When people talk about mentorship as far as software engineering is concerned, a lot of times it takes that kind of tactical, hey, can you unblock me? Can you help me fix this bug? All the way up to seeing what different coding patterns look like and being introduced to different technologies. It could be that. It could be, hey, could you show me how the CI/CD works? So it really is a whole host of things. But regardless, I think having a real mentor, someone that can kind of coach you and show you the way forward, is so valuable. And it's especially valuable at the very beginning of your career when you're just kind of starting out. As I mentioned before, when you realize that you don't know jack squat. And the mentor is the person that kind of leads you and is able to show you the way towards knowing more than jack squat. It's hard to not talk about mentorship first because honestly, it's such a game changer that I might even put it above learning. But the point is that you want to find that, and you want to be in a company that has a culture of mentorship and a culture of close-knit teams that are supportive rather than kind of siloed individual contributors. Back to my example, you don't want to be kind of working on your own. At least in my opinion, I'm always going to choose to have the mentor if it's up to me. And so that's something I would suggest for you too. Okay, lastly, transferable skills. So that's something that I mentioned in my example when I was talking about legacy technology. There's nothing wrong necessarily with legacy technology, and someone has to maintain the legacy apps. There's a lot of older technology out there. I believe Amazon was built on Java, and that's over 20 years old now, I believe. And there's plenty of other examples of technologies that are tried and true that are still out there. But the thing is that a lot of technology is changing, and especially as it pertains to the front end, which is kind of my specialty. There's a new framework, every month it seems like, and we can kind of joke about that. But I think the point is that technology changes really fast, and ideally you want to be in a place that is embracing those changes, and ideally where you're going to get opportunities to work on some of the newer technology, because when you hit the job market again, which I assume you will, and you won't end up staying in one place forever, it's going to be important to have skills that are fresh and skills that are in relevant technologies that are in demand in the job market. And that's just kind of a reality of the way that getting a job works and getting hired works. And so if you're in a job where you are working on a lot of legacy technology, which happened to me in my first job, where there aren't a whole lot of jobs out there for it, you're kind of constraining yourself and not giving yourself a ton of opportunity down the line, or that could potentially be the case. And so especially in a first job, you really want to be optimizing for growth. I assume that's obvious by now. It's really all about learning and growth and kind of advancement, especially at the beginning. And the technology you work in has a lot to do with how that ends up unfolding. And so if it's up to you, you want to work on the newer stuff, you want to work on the stuff that is in demand in the market. And that might not necessarily mean avoiding legacy technology, but I feel like the odds are good that it might. And so that's just something to keep an eye out for. It's something you want to have in the forefront of your mind when you're picking local companies or picking companies in general that you might want to work for when you're applying. You really want to be thinking about, what is the technology I'm going to be working in? How in demand is it in the market? And how is that going to help me get where I want to go? Okay, those are the 3 things that I would look for in the ideal first developer job: learning, mentorship, and transferable skills. You want to look for opportunities that have all 3 of those available for you. Like I said, this is coming from experience. My first job didn't necessarily check any of those boxes that I just mentioned, maybe one. And so I'm just trying to share some of my experience and hope that you can learn from me, hope that you can think about these things as you're going through and picking your first job. And I hope that whatever the job is ends up checking all 3 of those boxes, and then it ends up being a wonderful situation for you. So that's all for now. Subscribe if you found this helpful, and if you're looking for more content about building a career as a developer. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.